Apologize or get out of my house. Those were the words that slammed into me like a door to the face. His wife had been crying loud, theatrical saltwater with diamonds, but the moment his back turned, her tears evaporated. I stood there, the uninvited problem in a home I helped make possible, accused of a crime I couldn't name, passed the salt too much, breathed too softly, still too much. Every courtesy twisted into control, every silence written as disrespect. And then came the sentence, "Come back next Saturday," in front of their guests, and beg. I said yes. But here is what no one in that room understood. I wasn't agreeing to kneel. I was choosing the stage. All week, I replayed the year's second jobs, second-hand shoes, second chances. While they rehearsed my humiliation, I ironed a simple dress and packed something far sharper than pride. Receipts, clauses, transfers, screenshots that hiss when you read the fine print out loud. You see, tears aren't the only things that can be staged. So can the truth. Next Saturday, the candles will be perfect. The wine will be aged. The smiles will be polished like silver. She will tap a glass and invite me to confess. I will walk forward. I will apologize for waiting too long to say this. The doorbell will ring. A case will open. Pages will turn. And the room will fall so quiet, you can hear the numbers moving. Watch closely, watch the mask slip. Watch a marriage built on optics turn transparent under bright light. Watch a son's eyes learn the price of believing the wrong story. I was told to come and say sorry. I will, but not for what they think. Stay to the end. Hear the clause that steals in lowercase letters. See hands shake over crystal, count the zeros. Decide who owes whom, an apology when lights stop flattering and the math speaks tonight. The wind was loud enough to rattle the hospital windows the night my son was born. The nurse asked who would be signing the discharge papers, and the silence answered before I could. I held him close, counting tiny breaths like coins in a jar, saving each one. I named him Ansel Reed, and the name felt like a porch light, small, steady, impossible to miss. Outside, rain turned the street into a mirror. Inside, I learned how fast a room can empty when life gets complicated. I signed the papers with a hand that shook but didn't stop. The nurse tucked a blanket around us like a blessing. There's a picture from that night, fluorescent light. Tired eyes, a smile anyway. If you look closely, you'll see the moment I understood no one was coming to rescue us. I would have to be the rescue. The wind kept howling. My boy slept through it. My name is Mireya Solano, his mother the person who would learn to stretch $1 until it remembered it was a rope. Morning shifts, night shifts, buses that creaked like old bones. I kept a notebook of bills and due dates, and a second notebook for Hope Library hours. Free museum days, sales on kids' shoes. Supper was simple rice that steamed the Windows eggs that tasted better when we laughed. I told myself the truth out loud. 2 jobs aren't a tragedy, they're a bridge. On Sundays, I ironed his school shirts so crisp they made a sound when he moved. He never noticed. That was the point. Love is what you never let them see you lose. On hard nights, I counted electric rent bus fare milk. The math rarely loved me back, but it never lied. I learned to love the honesty. The climax of those years wasn't a miracle, it was endurance. The first medal came from a school math bee. They gave out cookies shaped like stars, and he pocketed 2-1 for later mom. We didn't own a dining table yet, so we celebrated with spaghetti on the living room floor, paper towels for placemats, and a TV tray for a centerpiece. I've eaten in nicer rooms since, but nothing tasted richer than that sauce. I taped the medal ribbon to the refrigerator with blue painter's tape because it felt ceremonial enough. He twirled pasta with a plastic fork, explaining factors and multiples, in a voice too big for his small frame. That night, I washed the pot by hand and left it to dry like a trophy. People think success sounds like applause. Sometimes it sounds like a faucet turning off and the apartment going quiet. Before bed, I checked his backpack, found a note from the teacher bright, focused. I added my own loved, prepared. On the bus, he watched skyline cranes swing like metronomes and said I want to build bridges, not small ones, bridges that touch both sides of a river and hold. I told Ansel Reed that bridges start on paper, then in minds, then in muscles. We folded a napkin into an arch and tested it with pennies until it failed. We tried again. When money was thin, we hunted for free workshops at the library, traced blueprints in pencil, and learned the language of weight and span. He asked whether bridges get scared in storms. They learn to sway, I said. That's how they stay. In a thrift store, we found a used book on civil engineering with someone else's underlines like ghosted encouragements. He fell asleep with it open on his chest, the pages breathing with him. That night, I promised the sky I would be thus his first bridge until he could build his own. The envelope was thin, but hope is lighter than paper. I set it on the table and called him over, pretending calm I didn't feel. He read the first line twice, then once more, as if he needed to teach his eyes new words. We are pleased to inform you. The sentence unfurled like a ribbon down the hallway. We both laughed, the kind of laugh that starts in your chest and finds your hands. I cried next because the body keeps score. He kept saying we did it, and that little word we made every bus ride worth it. I took a photo of the letter beside the old fridge medal. Proof that small victories grow up. We ate toast with jam as if it were cake, and called no one, not out of secrecy, but because some moments are too tender to divide. The climax wasn't the letter, it was the look on his face arrival. We picked a place with white napkins and a wine list that read like Latin. He said, order what you want, and I laughed because I've always wanted the same thing, a moment that isn't rushed. The check came to $200, more money than I used to make in a week of night shifts. He reached across the table, palm warm over mine. I remember everything you did, he said, and the room softened. The waiter refilled our water like a blessing. He told me about projects and promotions. I told him about a neighbor's tomato plants taking over the stoop. We ate too slowly for a city that likes speed. When the dessert fork clinked the plate, I caught our reflection in the window. Two people who'd outrun a storm. He walked me to the bus stop like old times, and I thought, this is how love sounds, not applause, just footsteps keeping pace. Sundays were a ritual no church could rival. Old movies with soft soundtracks, popcorn in the big bowl that used to hold laundry clips. I kept a running list on the fridge. Ask about his week. Don't fix, listen. We folded laundry during credits, competing to see who could stack the neatest. He teased me that I ironed socks. I teased him that he'd forget his keys if they didn't jingle. We shared the kind of silence that isn't empty, it's earned. On the couch, he'd lean back like he finally trusted the world again. I learned to read his tired chin-up meant good. Shoulders forward meant hard day. One Sunday, he dozed off mid-film, and the lamp lit his face, like a photograph I wanted to keep forever. I tucked a throw over him and whispered, rest. The climax was ordinary, a sleepy smile, a mother's hand smoothing hair. That's the thing about anchors, you don't notice them until drift begins. The first time Sabine Vale, the woman my son was dating, soon to be his wife, stepped into our apartment, the air changed. Not bad, not good, just curated. Perfume with a long memory heals that spoke in clicks. She introduced herself with a brightness that reflected more than it warmed. I offered coffee in my only matching mugs. She accepted eyes cataloging our shelves, the taped math medal, the thrift store engineering book, the TV tray we still used as a side table. She smiled without creasing like a photo smile. We made small talk that stayed small. My son hovered polite, hopeful, wanting us to fit like puzzle pieces. I complimented her dress, she complimented my cozy place, and the word landed like a pillow that doesn't quite hold your head. When they left, the apartment felt tidy and slightly out of place, as if a new picture frame had been set on a familiar mantel and was staring back. At the next visit, she used my first name, Mireia, with a tone that felt more permission than respect. It wasn't unkind. It was precise, like a boundary line painted between us. She insisted I sit while she poured tea, but the saucer lingered in her hand. half a second too long, like a lesson waiting to be learned. I answered warmly, choosing manners the way you choose a sweater for unpredictable weather. My son laughed at a story I told, and she smiled a fraction too late, as if applause had to be cued. When I offered to bring a casserole next time, she said, "Oh, don't trouble yourself," the way people say. Bless your heart, in rooms where they don't mean it. On the bus home, I replayed the afternoon and told myself I was being sensitive. But older folks know this truth. Houses aren't the only things with settling cracks. Some appear hairline thin, and then one day you notice daylight. A text arrived on a Sunday morning rain check. Busy day, then another, then a string. I learned the new etiquette of waiting. Keep plans soft, keep dinner simpler, keep hope from over-rising. His phone, once forgotten on our coffee table, now stayed face down beside his plate when we did see each other. When it buzzed, a small muscle in his jaw moved. He said work, I said of course. Mature love understands schedules. Still, there's a particular quiet to reheating a casserole for one, and older hearts recognize it. I filled the space with walks around the block. Neighbor talk about weather that refused to commit, and the bookstore's clearance cart. The climax came small. I sent miss you with a heart. The reply arrived 3 hours later, a thumbs up. Nothing cruel, just thin. You can survive on thin. You just shouldn't have to. That night, I folded the extra blanket alone and told myself tomorrow would be louder. I gave myself a rule: don't crowd the new. Let it find its shape. I remembered the first year of every big change: kindergarten, high school, his first job. How the schedule shivered before it settled. I started taking evening walks, counting porch lights, telling myself every one was a promise. This street will welcome you back. When he called, I kept my questions light and my laughter ready. I mailed a card for no reason except to put handwriting into a week full of screens. Proud of you, I wrote, then underlined it, because I meant it twice. The climax of restraint is private. No one claps when a mother chooses patience over panic. But I slept better on nights I remembered this: bridges don't pull on what they carry. They hold, they wait, and they don't resent the river for running fast. I set the table for two anyway. Hope likes a place to sit even when it's late. Years earlier, after a raise that felt like summer, he'd said, "One day you'll live with me. I'll take care of you like you took care of me." It wasn't a contract. It was a son's joy spilling over. I folded that sentence like a note in a yearbook and tucked it into my life where I could touch it without showing it. When the calendar got crowded with his plans, I'd reach for that sentence the way older hands reach for rosary beads steadying familiar. I didn't weaponize it. I didn't remind him. Love that keeps score eventually loses the game. Still, a promise has a pulse. On a grocery run, I caught myself pricing the nicer detergent I never buy and smiled at my own softness. The climax was a simple decision. I would believe the boy inside the man, even as the man learned new maps. Some promises take the long road home. I left the porch light on. The venue had chandeliers that could have their own zip code. I wore my best dress and carried dignity like a clutch, small, necessary, easy to lose. Place cards led me to a table near the service doors, where the staff moved like choreography. I told myself it didn't matter. The important part was his happiness. But when the first toast rose, the distance did too. I watched crystal catch light and thought about the spaghetti on our floor, the metal taped to the fridge, the bus stops we turned into milestones. Sabine Vale glowed in a way that made photographers efficient. I smiled for every picture and meant it halfway. The climax arrived quiet. During the mother-son dance, he whispered, "Thank you for everything." My throat held back years. When the song ended, he was pulled into a circle I could watch, but not join. That's how you know the weather has changed. You start carrying a sweater, even in summer. I brought a modest set of stoneware, soft gray with a faint blue rim. Sabine Vale unboxed each plate like she was grading homework. "These are perfect for simple nights," she said, setting the lid aside like a period at the end of a polite sentence. Ansel Reed rubbed the back of his neck, glanced at the designer set already on the table, and said nothing. I smiled anyway and asked where I could put mine. Sabine pointed toward a lower cabinet near the dog bowls and thanked me twice, the way people do when thanks is a bandage, not a feeling. We ate from porcelain that flashed under the lights. My gift sat quiet, stacked, and new, good enough to be hidden, not good enough to be used. After dessert, Ansel walked me to the door. "Great to have you," he said, and kissed my cheek. The climax came as a whisper. "We'll find a time to use them." We didn't. On my next visit, I stood in their living room, the kind with candles that never see fire. The photo wall had changed. Pictures of childhood gap-toothed grins, muddy sneakers, a graduation cap tilting were gone. Ansel Reed waved a hand toward the hallway and said they'd been stored for a cleaner look. Sabine Vale nodded, explaining how minimal lines let a home breathe, as if memories steal oxygen. A new set of frames gleamed honeymoon beaches, charity galas, group shots, with names I didn't know. I touched the blank rectangular shadows where old frames used to be, like tan lines after a summer you can't repeat. Ansel said the house felt more modern now. I heard less us. The climax arrived when Sabine picked up a new frame and polished the glass with her sleeve. "See," she said, satisfied. I did see. I saw life curated to the inch pared down until the history that made it possible no longer matched the furniture. I stopped by with muffins, the kind Ansel Reed used to devour warm. Sabine Vale opened the door just enough for conversation to fit through. "Oh, I wish you'd texted," she said, glancing back into the hallway. "Ansel has an important meeting." I held up the bag like a peace flag. 5 minutes, I suggested. She tilted her head the way a receptionist manages a schedule. "He's presenting. It's not a good moment." The door stayed between us. Polite distance turned into policy. I could hear faint keyboard clicks and my son's voice rising, then lowering, then gone. Sabine thanked me for understanding and promised to pass along the muffins. I stood on the porch as a neighbor jogged by, nodding like I lived there. The climax was small and sharp when the door clicked shut. The sound told me exactly where I stood. Not on the inside, not fully outside, just in the draft where people wait hoping good weather lasts. The lock turned with a clean, decisive sound, like a judge tapping a gavel. I stared at the brushed nickel handle and thought about all the knobs I'd turned for Ansel Reed doctors' offices. Classrooms, cramped apartments with sticky paint. Sabine Vale had already moved down the hallway, cradling her phone, promising to circle back later. I remained on the step muffins, cooling in the bag, a guest in a story I helped start. A passing delivery driver asked if I needed anything. I said I was fine and learned how quickly people believe you when you lie gently. The threshold felt taller than it used to, like someone raised it overnight. I carried the muffins home still warm, still sweet, and thought about all the times a closed door is simply a closed door, until it teaches you a new word, unwelcome. The climax was a memory, flashing like a porch light. Ansel as a boy, turning a knob too big for him, looking back to be sure I was there. Later the phone rang. Ansel Reed sounded formal the way people sound when they've rehearsed. "Mom, please don't drop by without texting first." He said, the line tugging but not breaking. I could hear Sabine Vale in the background, a murmur shaping the edges of his sentences. I said I understood because I did. Courtesy is a language I speak. But something in his tone had moved out like a tenant, leaving without returning the keys. He repeated the request and thanked me for respecting our boundaries, words that made sense on paper and heard out loud. I told him I loved him because that's the only truth that fits every conversation. The climax was a question I didn't ask. When did our stop including me? After the call, I wrote a reminder on an envelope. Text first. It sat on the table beside a bowl of apples. I didn't need the note. Some lessons arrive carved into the day. They invited me for dinner on Thursday. No need to bring anything, Sabine Vale texted, adding a smile that looked like a sticker. Ansel Reed greeted me with a quick hug and a glance at the timer on the oven. The table was beautiful and careful linen napkins. Polished forks place cards for show. When I offered to bring my roasted chicken next time, Sabine's eyes stayed kind, while her words stayed closed. "We've got a rhythm," she said. "I like to keep the menu cohesive." I nodded and took my seat, the one closest to the kitchen door. We ate well-complemented texture and temperature and compared notes on traffic. The climax snuck in with the dessert. Sabine served a perfect tart and handed me a plate from the designer set, leaving my stoneware stacked in the shadows. "We'll use those for casual nights," she said. I smiled. Some people never schedule casual nights. They only schedule guests. Another dinner, another small remark that grew teeth. "Mom, that cardigan's vintage," Ansel Reed joked, and the table laughed the way people laugh when they're relieved the joke isn't about them. Sabine Vale offered fashion advice, kindly, precisely, with the soft firmness of a teacher correcting a pencil grip. I laughed along because older adults know this. Sometimes you keep the peace by letting it pass through you. Later, while clearing plates, Ansel squeezed my shoulder, an apology disguised as affection. "You look great," he whispered, too late to matter, and not late enough to fix it. The climax wasn't the joke, it was the echo. I heard it again in the elevator, again on the sidewalk, again while folding laundry that night. Clothes can be mended, threads can be tied off, but every mother knows the stitch that truly holds a family is respect quiet plain daily. When it loosens, everything else starts to pull. Silence arrived wearing good manners. Fewer calls, shorter messages, plans penciled in, then erased. Ansel Reed explained deadlines. I believed him. Work is a demanding houseguest. Sabine Vale sent a calendar invite to a brunch 3 weeks away, and I clicked accept like a person adapting to weather. I filled the empty spaces with small kindnesses. Extra coffee for the neighbor, spare change for the busker, under the awning, a book returned on time. The climax came while I watered the plants and realized the peace I felt wasn't peace at all. It was exhaustion disguised as calm. I set the watering can down and said the sentence nobody wants to say out loud: enduring isn't the same as loving. The aloe by the window had outgrown its pot. I split it into 2, placed the second near the sink, and promised myself I'd learn the difference between quiet that heals and quiet that hides. One evening, I typed 3 words to Ansel Reed. "I miss you." The balloons on my phone suggested a heart, and I let them. Hours passed. I cooked enough for 2, then covered 1 plate with foil, because hope eats later. Sabine Vale posted photos from a tasting event. Glasses, tilted lights, soft, everyone framed in flattering amber. I refreshed nothing and watched everything. When the reply came, it was polite and busy. "Crazy day, soon." I read it twice the way you reread a recipe, and still know it won't rise. The climax was not the late response, it was the way my apartment learned the shape of it. The second plate went into the fridge. I turned off the lamp earlier than usual. I slept, but only in sections. In the morning, I stood at the sink and said, "Let's try again." That's the problem with thin answers. Your heart keeps thinking there's more on the next line. 2 days later, a text proposed next month. Ansel Reed added 3 exclamation points, as if enthusiasm could shorten a calendar. Sabine Vale tacked on a brunch recommendation with a reservation link and a fixed time slot. I typed "sounds good" because sometimes the only way to keep a door from closing is not to lean on it. The month lengthened like summer shadows. I filled Saturdays with errands and conversations with strangers that knew how to listen, baristas, cashiers. A woman at the pharmacy who admired my scarf. The climax arrived quietly at the mailbox when I held a coupon for a store I never visit and realized it was addressed to resident. Names matter, they anchor mail and people. I tucked the coupon into the recycling bin and walked home slower than usual. That night, I set the table for 1 and lit a candle anyway. Light is not a crowd, but it tries. On Sunday, I went to a church I don't attend for the kind of prayer that is mostly breathing. That's where I met Lavinia Pike, another mother, standing at the edge of her own new language. We compared bulletins like maps. She told me about a daughter who traded weekly calls for quarterly texts and swore she was fine with it until the quiet got loud. I told her about calendars and cabinets and dishes that don't get used. The climax was a sentence we spoke together without planning. "We're not crazy." Lavinia laughed, the warm kind that folds you in. We sat shoulder to shoulder, letting the choir be brave for us. Afterward, we walked to a corner cafe, two women carrying different versions of the same folded note. It felt like finding a landmark in a city you thought you'd lost. At the cafe, Lavinia Pike ordered something sweet and called it medicine. I chose something plain and called it honest. We traded home remedies for empty afternoons, organize a drawer bake. Something you can share, text a friend from the old days. She asked about Sabine Vale, and I chose my words like I was carrying a glass of water across a room. "She's polite," I said, "and careful with the parts of me she doesn't need." Lavinia nodded like she'd seen that trick before. The climax arrived when the waiter set down 2 cups and we placed our sorrows on the table beside them, not to dramatize, but to stop pretending. Cups leave rings. Grief does too. We didn't wipe them up right away. We let them mark the wood evidence that we were here together, telling the truth. Before we left, we picked a day to meet again. Naming a day is a kind of rescue. That night, sleep came in fragments. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen I save for important forms and wrote a sentence I wished weren't true. "If I don't protect the truth, I will lose Ansel Reed." I said his name out loud the way older folks do when talking to the air that has carried every version of a voice. Sabine Vale wasn't a storm I could outrun, not if I kept pretending the forecast didn't matter. The climax came when I folded that sentence and slid it beside the stoneware I had given them, the plates still untouched, still waiting for a casual night that never arrived. I felt the weight of both the words and the dishes. One could break if handled roughly, the other could save what was left if I used it right. I turned off the light and promised the dark I'd be ready the next time someone asked me to be quiet. Outside a polished cafe window, I watched Sabine Vale. My son's wife meet a well-dressed man I later learned was Evo Kincaid, a courier with connections. Their talk was neat, efficient, all corners, and no warmth. Then the handoff folder to her envelope to him. I've stood in enough post office lines to know the weight of paper can change a life. They checked the street the way people do who want to be seen only by each other. A bus sighed to the curb. I stayed hidden behind a planter, counting heartbeats like stoplights. When Sabine Vale tucked the envelope into her bag, she smiled the way people smile at mirrors, not friends. I thought of the stoneware plates sitting unused of photos removed for a cleaner look. The cafe door chimed. They split in opposite directions. The climax arrived as a decision in my chest I would stop guessing. Paper had moved. I would follow the paper. I bought a spiral notebook at the drugstore, nothing fancy, lined like a street you can keep to. On the first page, I wrote date, time, place. I logged the cafe, the envelope, the angle of the sun. Older adults understand this memory is honest, but ink is louder. I tracked Sabine Vale's patterns errands that took longer than errands meetings that never made dinner stories receipts that arrived without purchases I could see. I circled Tuesdays. Tuesdays kept repeating. In the margin, I wrote questions the way a doctor writes symptoms. Who is Evo Kincaid? Why? Tuesdays, the climax came when I caught my reflection in the window pen. Paused, realizing I wasn't being nosy. I was being careful. People call it snooping until the roof starts to leak. Then they wish you'd checked the attic sooner. I closed the notebook and set an alarm, Tuesdays, 2:30 p.m. If truth keeps a schedule, I plan to meet it on time. I brought my notes to Lavinia Pike, the friend I'd met at church. She listened the way nurses listen without hurry. "You need someone steady," she said, and gave me a card for Quill Mercer, a private investigator known for receipts, not drama. The card felt heavier than it looked. We met Quill Mercer at a quiet diner where the coffee refills itself. He didn't sell fear, he explained process, public records, financial footprints, patterns in plain sight. Older adults appreciate straight talk, so do I. He quoted a fee and paused, waiting for me to flinch. The climax was simple, I didn't. You don't bargain with a burning kitchen, you get water. I slid my notebook across the table like a relay baton. He placed it gently beside the menu as if both could feed a person. Start with Tuesdays, I said. He nodded once and wrote the word printing, each letter like a door he planned to open. I counted out the emergency cash I kept in a kitchen tin groceries for a bad month. A bus pass if mine broke a copay you don't expect. It wasn't meant for detectives, it was meant for life. But keeping a child is life. I handed Quill Mercer the envelope and said, "Find the truth." He didn't promise outcomes. He promised work. He asked for patience. And I told him patience is a language older women speak fluently. The climax came at my sink that night, rinsing a cup, staring at the faucet, as if answers might come out of it. The apartment was too quiet for such a loud decision. So I turned on the radio and let someone else sing about bridges. I slept with my phone on loud and the notebook by the lamp. Money had left my hand. I prayed it would return as something you can't buy clarity. In the morning, I made coffee strong enough to stand. Waiting changes the shape of air. A week in Quill Mercer sent brief updates. Following verifying nearly their words like mile markers on a road with no exits. I filled the days with chores that felt like sandbags laundry sweeping, repotting the aloe that had outgrown itself same as us. Lavinia Pike checked in every other afternoon, asking nothing, offering conversation about everything but fear. I set alarms I didn't need, ate meals I barely tasted, and kept a chair by the window like I was expecting weather. The climax arrived when my phone buzzed, with a time and a place, Thursday 7 p.m. diner. Bring a folder, bring yourself. I set the kettle even though I wasn't staying home. Rituals steady hands better than hope alone. Before I left, I touched the stoneware plates and whispered, "Hold." It's a strange prayer, but it fit. Some things you don't use are still keeping something from breaking. At the diner, Quill Mercer slid a manila folder across the table like a quiet bell. Inside, copies of an investment agreement my son had signed with Sabine Vale, 2 names under a title that promised partnership. He tapped a paragraph, small print, too small to be kind. In the event of dissolution, assets transfer solely to the spouse listed as primary manager. Sabine Vale was the only manager. I read it once like a story, twice like a warning, 3 times like a mother taking a pulse. Did he see this? I asked. Quill Mercer steadied his coffee and said, "He saw the bold words. Most people do. Older adults know this trick. Hide a knife in italics and call it style." The climax was a sound I hadn't made in years. A short, dry laugh with no humor in it. "Of course," I said. "Of course." Quill nodded toward the next page. And then there's the money trail. The statements showed $120,000 leaving my son's savings and walking neat as soldiers into accounts controlled by Sabine Vale. From there, payments radiated credit cards, a mortgage extension under Cormac Vale, and Odette Vale luxury charges filed under household, a word that can hide a crowd. Quill Mercer pointed to dates that matched the Tuesdays in my notebook. "Transfers just before 3, he said, every time. I thought of the envelope at the cafe of Evo Kincaid's Clean Exchange. Money doesn't vanish, it changes rooms. The climax was a physical thing. I gripped the folder so hard, the metal clip warmed. Older adults have felt this before. The moment you realize the appliance didn't break today. It's been breaking for months, and you only just heard it. Quill slid me a copy. "You'll want this," he said. I folded the paper like something fragile and put it where I put important things close to the heart, easy to reach. Next came screenshots I didn't want to see, but needed to read texts between Sabine Vale and Odette Vale, her mother. In them, I was a variable to be subtracted. He's still attached to her one line read, "I'll fix it," another answered. Then the sentence that iced the room, "Tears always work." I've sat through enough school meetings and medical consults to recognize strategy when I hear it. Quill Mercer kept his voice level. We verified the numbers, the accounts, the phones. Older adults know the value of verification. It's the difference between gossip and evidence. The climax came when I saw my son's name shortened to initials like they were fitting him into a spreadsheet. People who love you use your whole name like a hymn. I closed my eyes, opened them, and said, "Keep going." Quill turned the page to a ledger that didn't belong to us at all, and yet had eaten straight from our table. Public records told the rest liens and late notices under Cormac Vale and Odette Vale property taxes pirouetting near default cards stacked to the limit, and then a little past. The family image of old money was newer than their last statement. Quill Mercer said it gently, the way a doctor shares a diagnosis that explains everything they're leveraged. The lifestyle's on credit. Older listeners will understand when the numbers finally speak. The room gets quiet, and you hear your own pulse. The climax arrived when I pictured the photo wall that replaced our History Charity Gala's Destination Shores designer plates. All of it curated by a budget that needed my son's backbone to stand. I pressed my palm flat on the documents as if I could slow them down. "What else?" I asked. Quill lifted a final folder. "Plans," he said, "a bigger house, a bigger loan, and a clause that would make him a guest in his own home." The plan was priced at $800,000 listings emails, and a timeline that aimed my son at a closing date like a guided arrow. Down payment from family documentation forthcoming, both phrases underlined in an email from a realtor named Greer Holiday. Quill Mercer had flagged the attachment's draft, addenda favoring Sabine Vale in any dispute. If he signs, Quill said he carries this for decades. Older adults understand the weight of a mortgage. You can feel it in your knees before you feel it in your wallet. The climax came when I recognized the choreography isolate flatter rush sign. I traced the date of the final meeting with my fingertip. 1 week, 7 days until a pen could chain a life. I looked at the clock on the diner wall, stopped at 3:17, a joke with poor timing, and then at Quill Mercer. "We won't be late," I said. "Not this time." He nodded. The coffee had gone cold. We didn't refill it. "Choose a moment with eyes in the room," Quill Mercer advised. "People rewrite private scenes. They don't rewrite public ones." He laid out a simple plan, proof first, then sequence, then silence. Let the paper speak before emotion steals the microphone. Lavinia Pike offered to sit in the back of any room I named, the way friends hold a place. In line when your legs need a minute. We practiced phrases older adults know by heart. Let me finish. Please look here, read this out loud. The climax was the decision to pick the very stage Sabine Vale had chosen for my apology. She wanted witnesses, she would have them. I wrote the order on an index card, contract transfers messages. Debt's house. Underneath, I added one more word, son, because data is cold without the person it protects. I slid the card into my wallet behind the bus pass. When it's time to move, you shouldn't have to search. The invitation arrived like a dare, dinner, 8 o'clock, a chance to make things right. I replied yes and circled the date on the calendar the way you circle a storm on the weather map. Quill Mercer confirmed he'd arrive at 8:30 with duplicates, timestamps, and a chain of custody that could stand up in a room full of disbelief. Lavinia Pike texted a heart and the words, "I'll be there quietly." I laid out a gray dress and a steadier voice. The climax was a rehearsal at my kitchen counter. I said I'm sorry, then added the rest for waiting too long to bring the truth. I pictured Greer Holiday's email on a screen. Evo Kincaid's envelope in my mind. Odette Vale's texts printed large enough to read from the doorway. I turned off the light and left the porch lamp on the way. Mothers do when someone they love is late. The house exhaled. So did I. Tomorrow the paper would breathe. At 8 sharp, the house glowed like a catalog. Music, low laughter, higher glassware chiming like polite bells. I stepped inside and felt the temperature of confidence. Someone's not mine. A waiter passed with canapes I couldn't pronounce. Sabine Vale floated from guest to guest, all angles and poise. Ansel Reed took my coat, eyes kind, and hurried the way you look at a clock you wish ran slower. I took in the room, the photo wall polished, the silver bright enough to reflect whatever story you preferred. I've been in rooms like this before: school fundraisers, office parties, places where worry dresses up and pretends to be fine. I folded my hands, counted my breaths, and remembered the order of my proof like a hymn. The climax came when a guest asked how we knew the hosts. Family, I said. The word tasted true and complicated. Both can live in one mouth. I kept standing. The night kept shining. Sabine Vale reached me with a hostess smile that landed like a ruler on a desk. "So glad you could make it," she said, air-kissing near my cheek. Her perfume had a memory. It stayed. "Please come in." She guided me 3 careful steps, then released my arm, as if returning a library book on time. Ansel Reed introduced me to a cluster of coworkers, whose names arrived in a hurry like luggage on the wrong carousel. I nodded and held a glass of water the way other people hold a shield. A woman complimented my dress. I thanked her and meant it. I noticed place cards assigned seating attention to detail. So precise it erased warmth. The climax flickered when Sabine's hand grazed my elbow, steering me toward the living room with the kind of touch that suggests a stage direction. "Wait here," I did. I have learned that patience properly placed can turn into gravity. Ansel Reed moved through the room, naming people as if reading captions under photos. "This is my mother," he said. Accurate, distant, acceptable in print. I smiled on cue and offered simple conversation traffic weather, charity auction centerpieces. No one asked about the spaghetti on the floor or the metal on the fridge. Those stories don't match dimmers and decanters. Sabine Vale laughed in the right places, eyes already scanning the next circle. I stayed present the way older adults do when their bodies recall chairs that hurt and shoes that pinch. You settle anyway, and you endure. The clock over the mantel was decorative but correct. I watched the hands sweep past 8:15 and pictured an index card in my wallet. Contract transfers, messages, debts, house. The climax arrived as a quiet posture. I straightened my back the way nurses taught me, after long days, shoulders down, chin soft. It makes the next breath steadier. I'd need steady. At 8:20, Sabine Vale lifted a knife and tapped a crystal rim, delicate notes that gathered conversations like birds into one branch. People turned, chairs angled, the room settled. "Friends," she began, "thank you for being here tonight." She spoke with the rhythm of rehearsal warmth on a timer. "We also want to acknowledge family." Her eyes found me with a look that fit the frame but not the feeling. "There's something meaningful to say." A ripple of polite anticipation moved through the guests. Ansel Reed stood beside her hand at his pocket smile, not quite fast enough. The climax came when she added, "A small misunderstanding will be addressed, just a moment of grace." I recognized the choreography of image management. Define the story before the truth gets a microphone. I nodded as if agreeing with an invisible cue. My hands weren't shaking. The years had taught them how to hold a tray, a child, a line. They held. I stepped forward, felt carpet soften under my shoes, and set my glass down where it wouldn't leave a ring. "I was asked to apologize," I said. A few guests relaxed the way people do when a scene promises to end tidily. "I will." The pause was deliberate. Room temperature changed a degree. "I'm sorry for taking this long to bring the truth." That word rearranged a few faces. Ansel Reed blinked. Sabine Vale's smile stayed where it had been placed, but something behind it shifted. "I held the room the way you hold a door open for someone carrying too much." "I'll be brief," I said, "because older listeners deserve mercy." I brought documents. I brought dates. I brought numbers that don't lie. The climax was a promise. No one has to take my word for it. I let silence fall and do its job. Sometimes stillness is louder than fury. Sometimes calm is the match. At 8:30 on the dot, the doorbell answered for me. Heads turned the way crops turn toward weather. Quill Mercer stood in the doorway with a leather case and a posture that says, "The work is done before the talking starts." Ansel Reed moved to greet him, confusion arranging his features by habit. "He's with me," I said, voice level. Quill Mercer nodded to the hosts, to the room, and to the table, where space had been left, as if the night expected a centerpiece. He set the case down and opened it with a sound like a piano lid's soft final. The first folder waited under his hand. The climax wasn't the entrance, it was the quiet after. Parties know how to handle laughter, not paper. I saw Sabine Vale's chin lift, half an inch, a reflex of someone preparing to outtalk what she cannot outrun. I almost felt sorry, almost. Then I remembered Tuesdays. We began with the contract. Quill Mercer slid copies to the nearest guests, asked Ansel Reed to read a highlighted clause. The paper looked kind, the font did not. In the event of dissolution, I watched my son's eyes find the place where the sentence turns. All assets transfer to the primary manager. Sabine Vale's name stood alone in that role. Someone coughed, someone else stopped mid-sip. I spoke softly the way you speak in a hospital when the doctor points to a shadow on the screen. He signed the bold words. The rest was waiting. Sabine Vale reached toward Ansel, but he stepped back without meaning to. The climax arrived not as yelling, but as a tremor. The paper shook in his hands. I remember when he was small and learned to read street signs. Tonight, he learned a different sign exit. The contract framed as partnership had built a door that only opened one way. Next came the statements. Quill Mercer marked the page with a tab. The dates matched the Tuesdays in my notebook. Here, and here, he said. 120,000 leaving one account, arriving in another, controlled by Sabine Vale, then radiating to debts under Cormac Vale and Odette Vale. We passed copies like hymnals. The room held them the way churches hold truth awkwardly, but with respect. I named nothing the paper didn't name. Older guests leaned closer, younger ones checked phones with uneasy thumbs. Ansel Reed traced a line from savings to elsewhere, his finger stopping where the numbers did. The climax was a sound nothing. No clink, no chatter, just the math. That kind of silence is familiar to anyone who has balanced a checkbook after Christmas. The difference tonight, the gifts were illusions, the receipts real. I folded my hands again. They didn't shake. I had been frightened of this moment for years. It arrived and found me ready. Quill Mercer lifted the next sheet screenshots of messages between Sabine Vale and Odette Vale. He read them calmly like weather. He's still attached to her. Tears always work. We need him to set boundaries. Every sentence stitched a shape we already recognized. Sabine Vale said the texts were out of context. Quill Mercer pointed to timestamps, to matching phone records, to the dull persistence of metadata. Older adults understand context is often the thing people ask for when the truth fits too well. Ansel Reed looked from page to page, eyes not finding a safe landing. I said nothing, the paper did the talking. The climax came with one line, I will remember until I forget my own name. I just need him to finish cutting ties. The room pulled back a fraction, like a tide you can feel in your knees. Some guests set their drinks down carefully, as if glass were suddenly precious. From near the mantel, a voice cut clean through the hush. Junia Hale, a business owner. I'd met only in passing, spoke with the authority of someone who reads contracts for sport. So the Europe trips? She asked eyes on Sabine Vale, whose money paid for those. The question hung like a chandelier waiting for an answer, strong enough to hold it. Sabine Vale started with denial, the soft kind that hopes to pass. Quill Mercer slid forward a page of charges labeled household. Airfare, hotels, jewelry for special event, dates that danced with the transfers. The climax wasn't the paper this time. It was Junia Hale's face settling into comprehension. The room shifted allegiance not to me, not to drama, but to arithmetic. I have trusted numbers my whole life when people were complicated. Tonight, numbers returned the favor. I caught Ansel Reed glancing at me like a man meeting his own reflection after a long absence. Cornered Sabine Vale reached for tears the way some people reach for a fire extinguisher-trained response. I made mistakes, she said, but it was for us. The words might have softened the room on another night. Not this one. Quill Mercer kept the pace, unhurried clause transfer message match. Ansel Reed put a hand on the table, steadying himself, the way you steady a boat when the wake hits. I stayed still. Older hearts know the cost of speaking when silence works better. The climax was small and decisive. Ansel Reed removed his wedding band, not theatrical, just careful like someone setting down something that suddenly weighed too much. He didn't throw it. He simply stopped wearing it. A guest near the door exhaled a sound that joined the evening like a footnote. Sabine Vale's tears kept coming, but there are some truths water can't blur. We opened the last folder for the financials emails with Greer Holiday, the realtor arranging an $800,000 purchase. Draft clauses tilted the table towards Sabine Vale. Again, family funds for the down payment primary occupancy rights language that sounds polite until you live under it. Quill Mercer pointed to next week's closing date highlighted. Ansel Reed stared at it as if looking at a train schedule that had been rushing toward him all along. If he signs, Quill said he's tied to this for 30 years. Older adults understand that number. You feel it in your bones first. The climax was a breath I watched my son take, one that didn't fully arrive. He picked up the copy with Greer Holiday's signature block and held it like a hot plate. Not happening, he said. The words were soft, but they sat on the table like weight. Some futures are cancelled with 3 syllables and a witness. Ansel Reed turned toward me with a face I recognized from kindergarten, from graduations, from the day letters arrived like spring. I was wrong, he said. The room blurred a little. Age will do that to your eyes at the exact moment you need them. Quill Mercer closed one folder, then another the way a man tidies a battlefield after the noise is over. Sabine Vale watched from the sofa, mascara a map she hadn't intended to draw. I'll fix this. Ansel added, voice unsteady, but aiming straight. The climax was mine to carry carefully. Let's end it tonight, I answered. I didn't mean marriage papers. Those require daylight. I meant the story told about me, about us. I meant the lie that had been standing where family should stand. I reached for his hand and didn't miss. The room watched, and for once I didn't mind having an audience. The evening didn't shatter, it thinned. Sabine Vale sank into a corner of the sofa like a dress collapsing on a hanger. Somewhere a glass fell and rolled without breaking, a tiny mercy that still sounded like an ending. Guests began drifting to the doorway in soft pairs, whispering the way people whisper when they've witnessed a thing that will grow teeth by morning. Quill Mercer gathered duplicates into neat stacks like a teacher reclaiming graded work. Ansel Reed stood beside me, taller than I remember, or maybe just upright in a new way. The climax was an absence no one asked me to apologize. The script had lost its lines. I picked up my glass of water, now warm, and drank it anyway. Hydration helps after storms. Junia Hale caught my eye and gave a small nod, the kind you offer a stranger whose courage arrived on time. The house dimmed by inches as guests thanked the hosts without quite touching them. Cormac Vale and Odette Vale were nowhere to be seen. Some people exit before the picture is taken. Ansel Reed walked me to the door the way he did when he was young. Not because the sidewalk was dark, but because it was right. Quill Mercer said he'd follow up tomorrow with next steps attorney's statements, a list of phone numbers that would answer on the first ring. I thanked him for showing up with paper instead of speeches. The climax came on the threshold, the porch light threw a clean circle around us, and I recognized the feeling you get after a good cry or a hard truth, empty and steady at the same time. Sabine Vale remained inside a silhouette, waiting for a story that would not return. We stepped into the night. The air was clear enough to breathe all the way down. By morning, the apartment had that Sunday quiet, even though it wasn't Sunday. Ansel Reed sat on my old sofa, where the cushion dips, elbows on knees, breathing like he'd been running in place all night. I poured coffee and slid a mug across the table the way you hand someone a railing. He didn't speak, he just held the cup with both hands so it wouldn't shake. The window let in a square of light that climbed the wall inch by inch. I thought about all the mornings I woke him for school. Toast bus pass a kiss to the hairline, and how some rituals never retire. They just change jobs. He stared at the rim of the mug the way people look at road maps, like it might tell him where to turn next. When he finally found words, they were small and right. "I'm here," he said. That was the climax, not a speech, just a location. He had come home to begin. We sat close and I put my hand over his simple, steady, the way older hands know how to do. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting," I said. "It's remembering without letting the memory own the room." Ansel Reed nodded, eyes red, but clearer than last night. We made a short list on a grocery receipt. No blame, no shouting, no rewriting facts. Yes to boundaries, yes to time, yes to choosing family on purpose. He said he wished he could rewind 3 years. I told him grown men don't need rewind buttons, they need steering wheels. He laughed once, the kind that shakes a little, and then he cried like a roof finally finding the right slope for rain. The climax was quiet. He took my hand, not as a child, not as a defendant, but as a man. "Help me keep this straight," he said. "I will," I answered, because I already had. Love doesn't erase the ledger, it balances it. By noon, Quill Mercer was at my table with a yellow legal pad and the patience of someone who lives in the world of clocks and proof. He walked Ansel Reed through next steps, notify the realtor Greer Holiday to cancel the pending $800,000 contract, file to freeze joint accounts tied to Sabine Vale, deliver a preservation letter for texts and emails to prevent accidental deletions, retain counsel for recovery actions against transfers to Cormac Vale and Odette Vale. He spoke plainly, dates, forms, offices, confirmation numbers. Older adults appreciate that kind of mercy. Ansel Reed signed where he needed to sign. I scanned each page like a mother checks a child's backpack homework. Lunch permission slip. The climax landed when Quill Mercer tapped his phone and said, "Closing is off, documented." A single sentence, but the house-sized weight of it left the room. We all exhaled. Some fights swing fists, ours stacked paper until truth couldn't fall. On Sunday, he showed up with a cardboard box from the garage of the big house, edges worn, top taped twice. Inside were the pictures that had gone modern, the math metal grin, the spaghetti picnic, the letter beside the old fridge. Ansel Reed set them on my table one by one, dust rising like tiny fireworks in the late light. We made spaghetti again, just because the body remembers what comfort tastes like. While the sauce simmered, we sorted frames, cheap, chipped, perfect. He asked where to put the first one, and I pointed to the blank wall above the couch that has been waiting longer than I admitted. The climax was a nail tapped in with the bottom of a measuring cup and a photo sliding into place, an everyday ceremony with holy results. We ate off the good plates because simple nights deserve honor. In the quiet after dishes, we sat under our history like shelter. A week later, Ansel Reed moved into a small, bright apartment with honest floors and a view of a parking lot that looks like possibility if you squint. He carried boxes labeled in black marker tools, books, photos. He hung the metal near the door, a private joke with the past. The couch came in sideways and sighed into the room like it had arrived home first. He screwed in soft bulbs, set a folding table where a dining set might go someday, and placed a single spare key in my palm. "For Sundays," he said. The climax was the next sentence I won't forget, "where I'm from." We took a picture of the first wall he finished, 3 frames Baby Bridge sketch college letter. Quill Mercer texted updates. Filings were moving forward. The name Sabine Vale didn't enter this room. Not a rule, just good air. We stood in the doorway and practiced the old habit of goodbye that means come back. This is my reward. I am Mireia Solano, and this is what I have learned. Silence may look like peace, but it often hides a wound. True peace has power. It sets boundaries and keeps the doors we cherish from being flung off their hinges. Money can embellish a lie, fund a party, and hire applause, but it cannot buy back self-respect or the past or a mother. The numbers have spoken the truth. I simply held my ground long enough to hear them. I will keep the Sunday light shining brightly, but I will not live in a house built on apologies I owe nothing to. The bridges still matter. They wobble and they still stand. My son stands beside me. The rest may crumble. If you are listening with a pain that has learned to whisper, borrow my words, I will not disappear to please someone. I'll love with a door and a lock. Have you set boundaries with your family? Let me know, and then hit subscribe to the channel for more great stories.